This is the Fight for Socialism. I am Bianca Mageni. I'm your moderator for the event, and I'm joining you from Jojage or Montreal on the unceded territory of the Kanien'kehá:ka people. And this is a land that has long been a meeting place for many First Nations, including the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe. And so it's in that spirit that our solidarity crosses borders, movements to a future free of all forms of settler colonialism. So our speakers tonight, it really is a super panel. We have Kshama, Yves Engler, Jasmine Peardon, and Tom Reid. Like I said at the beginning, the chat is open. Please do say hi. Let us know where you're joining from. Please keep it respectful, no racist or sexist or harmful speech. I think that goes without saying. In terms of the event today, we're going to be hearing from each speaker. And then we're going to have a discussion amongst speakers. And then we're going to be opening it up to you, the audience, for your questions. So in terms of the fight for socialism, this event is about both the big struggle against war, against austerity, against climate chaos, and it's also about the practical organizing that delivers housing, that delivers good wages, that delivers expanded public services. And this new platform that's come out of the Yves Engler for NDP leadership campaign is called Capitalism Can't Be Fixed, Onward to a Socialist Future. You can find that at ndp2026.ca. It is out. Use it, debate it, spread it around. The campaign is very, very proud of this. And so without further ado, on to our speakers. Our first speaker is Jasmine Peardon. Jasmine spent several years working in public policy and is now pursuing her master's at Concordia and is very active in the Palestine movement in Montreal. She's also one of the lead authors and co-lead of the policy committee for the Yves for NDP Leader campaign. Welcome, Jasmine.
Hello, thank you. So I guess I'll just talk about how I came in to be part of the policy committee. And so when Yves announced his campaign on the Canadian Foreign Policy Hour and that he was looking for volunteers, I heard it a few days late, but I immediately sent an email to be a part of the policy committee because I was super excited. I had no idea how the selection process would go. I thought maybe they're looking for experts, like subject matter experts, people who've created policy documents before. I did work in policy, but not on such a broad document. But yeah, so anyways, I sent an email and then just a few days later, the meetings began. And then the first call, there was 40 or 50 volunteers and we did really brief introductions. It was a great mix of older and younger people. Some were super experienced, some were really niche subject matter experts. And we heard from Yves to talk about which type of platform that he envisioned. And he spoke a bit about the goals of the campaign, and he really emphasized that leadership races are times to determine the trajectory of the party. And so this was a time to put forward bold ideas and not to water anything down. And that was, I think, really exciting and refreshing. And then that was pretty much the most direction he gave for a little while. We kept him up to date on everything, but he just seemed happy with the way that everything was going and gave us a lot of freedom, so we just kept going. But yeah, on the first call, we determined the policy areas for the platform. We decided on 6 broad areas to divide the volunteers into. So we had socialism, which was the main big one, environment and climate, military and foreign policy, land back, decolonization and immigration, rights, freedoms, and democracy, and then culture and well-being. And then we had 2 floater categories. There's my kitty. One was AI, regulation, and technology. And we didn't really know where it fit because it kind of goes across all the categories. And then we also had equity and oppression, which again, it's so interdisciplinary that we just didn't know which category to put it into. And then with the 45 or so people, we each volunteered for a committee or multiple. And then the subcommittees kind of just ran with it from there. I would say probably one of the most interesting aspects of this whole experience was that just nobody had any idea who I was or who like each other were. So when debates happen, like there was no hierarchy or I don't know, like I just didn't know what they were experts in. So it really was like if you're putting forward an idea, you better have like a source and you can make a good argument for it. And then everything was just about like what's the best argument, what makes the most sense, and like how can you like it had to be backed up by like lived experiences and by like knowledge. So yeah, I think for me that was like very empowering because obviously I'm younger. Lots of people on the call were very experienced socialists in like their 60s. So I kind of had like a bit of imposter syndrome, I guess. But despite me being younger and completely unknown, I really found that like all my arguments and ideas were taken seriously as long as I could back them up and like I had good sources and good reasons to be arguing them. So yeah, that was really nice to like not have a bias against me for being younger. And then in developing the platform, there was definitely a lot of areas that had debate, but I would say it's pretty remarkable about like how aligned we all were on the values of the platform, despite like we had representation from BC and Montreal, French speakers, English speakers, older, younger. So it was actually pretty remarkable how we all knew which direction the platform wanted to go in. And then after the subcommittees finished up, we shared all of our policies together. And it kind of got to this like, okay, what's next point? Because we all agreed on these policies, but it's like, how do we make a cohesive document through all of these small subcommittees? And that was probably like the hardest part, just trying to weave together all of these really niche areas, make them all the same format, make sure there's no inconsistencies or like contradictions. So yeah, me and Mark, the co-chair of the policy committee, we dedicated a lot of hours to just creating like a cohesive document. And then as a final step, like after Eve approved it and everybody was super happy with it, we sent it out to some people that we felt like maybe their views weren't represented on our policy committee because maybe they just didn't see the email, you know, back in July. So that was a major part of our platform was doing this outreach and making sure that other people's opinions and lived experiences were included on the platform. And it changed the document in like many ways. So it's really like an adaptive process over time. But yeah, that's pretty much how it all came together. It was really democratic. I felt heard. I felt like other people were heard. Yeah, I think that's it.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jasmine, for just letting us know how that process went, for your leadership as well. It seemed like a miraculous thing to me for so many people to come together and to produce such a coherent, beautiful, and liberatory document. And I think it's a testament to what can be done. So thank you for that. And I look forward to hearing more from you during the discussion. So next up, we're going to be hearing from Tom Reid. Tom came up. Oh, I don't think you all can see me. Oh dear. So next up is Tom Reid. Tom came up through the New Left in the late 1960s, was part of Students for a Democratic Society in New York, worked with the Southern Rural Action Program in Alabama in 1970, later joined the Printers Union in Britain, and on returning to Canada, worked at the University of Toronto Library with CUPE 1230. A high point of his work was conducting oral histories with left organizers active from the 1930s to the 1970s. Welcome, Tom. You just have to unmute yourself. You're trying? Okay, let me see if I can help you. Is that any better?
That's much better. Okay, thank you very much, Jasmine. I'm one of the old people that was on the committee with on the program committee, as was described. Now, at its founding conference in Chicago 120 years ago, the industrial workers of the world, known as the Wobblies, issued a proclamation which declared the working class and the employing class have nothing in common. That simple but profoundly true statement is at the core of Yves Engler's campaign for NDP leadership. The campaign's main slogan, as Jasmine mentioned, is capitalism can't be fixed, which of course is why we need socialism. This attitude is, of course, exactly the opposite of the social democratic reformism historically pushed by the NDP, which holds that the interests of bosses and workers are fundamentally compatible. But that's a lie. The truth is that class struggle is a zero-sum game. The proposition that capitalism can't be fixed should be one that every serious socialist can support. When I heard that Yves was running for NDP leader, I was intrigued because I'd read his materials on foreign policy over the years and found him to be well-informed, hard-hitting, and consistently anti-imperialist. His intellectual integrity and his unwavering commitment to the oppressed, which is currently highlighted in his activity around the Palestinian victims of what he's branded the Holocaust in Gaza. All this, I thought, made him a very unlikely candidate for NDP leader. So the first online campaign event I attended had a lot of discussion of things that needed to be done to improve life for ordinary people. Things like expanding daycare, raising pensions, restoring social services, and making investments in education, healthcare, and public housing. At one point, an older, experienced comrade who I remember from the old days said, well, at some point, we're going to need to be able to explain how we propose to pay for all this. And he suggested that one thing we should consider is implementing a special tax on billionaires. To which Yves immediately replied that instead of taxing billionaires, he thought it would be better if we just got rid of them. I was charmed by that sentiment, and I was also very impressed by how he was able to come up with a popular way to express the traditional socialist call for expropriating big capital without compensation. The platform of Yves' campaign proposes to collectivize all significant corporate assets, including energy, transport, telecommunications, finance, industry, and agriculture. This has always been at the very center of the socialist project, along with the necessity to get rid of the guardians of the capitalist state, the military, the police, the judiciary, and replace them with new institutions that are committed to defending a new social order, that is, the interests of working people and the oppressed. The campaign platform, which has gone through several iterations and is likely to continue to evolve somewhat, I believe, has from the beginning had a very strong emphasis on eco-socialism. It states that capitalism, quote, is destroying the physical environment upon which the survival of humanity depends, unquote, and proposes to organize economic activity on the basis of, quote, planned and sustainable development, unquote, in place of the irrational chaos resulting from the struggle to maximize profit at any cost. Yves advocates a break with NATO. He advocates the dissolution of NORAD and a policy of active international solidarity with all people struggling against imperialist oppression. His program includes a plan for eliminating homelessness through a massive expansion in the construction of high-quality, affordable public housing. He also advocates the elimination of tuition, the abolition of all student debt, and making significant investments in education across the board. There are a great many other policies outlined in this program, which are I'm not going to even try to get into, but I suggest that everyone can familiarize themselves by acquainting themselves with the document. It is pretty obvious, I think, that we're moving into a period of capitalist economic downturn, a feature of this system. There's going to be a lot of pain coming from this as people lose their houses, lose their jobs, and face a very uncertain future. And a lot of people are going to be looking for big picture answers to this situation. So I think it's very important for the left and the workers' movement to do everything we can to make it clear that the root of the problem is not immigrants, it's not trade unions, it's not whatever else the far right comes up with to blame, but rather the problem is the capitalist system itself. The core message of this campaign is a radical break with the NDP's history of class collaboration in favor of advocating a policy of class struggle. That message is one that all socialists should be able to get behind. This campaign can be a potential opportunity for the beginning of a major move to the left in this country, I believe. There are already 1,000 volunteers involved in one way or another, and it's entirely possible that we will be able to draw in many thousands more radical youth and militant workers who have already figured out for themselves that capitalism can't be fixed and are looking for a viable alternative. We don't claim to have all the answers, and some things still need to be worked out. But this is already an important initiative, which is evident in the fact that powerful advocates of the status quo, both within the NDP and outside it, are worried enough to want to shut Yves down. They're well aware that popular disenchantment with the results produced by the free market at home and abroad is reaching levels probably not seen since the 1930s. There's an acute possibility that we will see some major eruptions of social and political unrest in the fairly near future. Yves' campaign provides a political focus and an organizational framework that could potentially help lay the basis for a massive leftist resurgence in the near future. I encourage you to get involved and to help make that happen. Thank you.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you so much, Tom. Thank you. That was rousing. Thank you for stitching today's fights together with living memory of past movements as well, and for sharing with us your vision for massive leftist movement and outlining the significance or the potential significance of this campaign and our platform. So our third speaker is Yves Engler. Yves is a Montreal-based activist and author of 13 books. He is an internationalist. He's a leading critic of Canada's foreign policy. He has also championed peace, eco-socialism, Indigenous rights, and economic democracy. He is fluent in English and French and speaks basic Spanish as well. For those that are interested, Yves, over to you.
Merci. Thanks to Tom and Jasmine for putting together this platform, and another 50 or so other people who worked directly on it, and then the dozens more who assisted in translation, design, and the like. This really is a platform that can you mute? This really is a platform that is brought together through a very open democratic mechanism, which is centrally important to winning the policies in the platform. So it's not just there's substance, there's a vision, there's a challenging of capitalism, but it's also done in a way that is democratic, empowering, and offers the direction we need to actually build the force that will force these policies, that will be the power that will implement these policies. Now, today on the front page of the Globe, there's a story about how Howard Lutnick spoke to bankers and capitalist event in Toronto yesterday, and saying that free trade is done and that there's no more free trade. And this is clearly causing panic among the capitalists in Toronto, that the no more Canadian-built cars will be sent to the US or be accepted in the US. So I think that we are hitting a moment here where the neoliberal model is unraveling in and of itself, right? There is a breakdown. There's a panic, I would say, among Canadian capitalists in response to the moves of Donald Trump. So there is a moment here where it's absolutely imperative that we are putting out alternatives. We are discussing ideas in the platform. Concretely, it calls for this, and this should really be minimum. Start a review of Kshama to consider a process of withdrawing, and no new trade accords with the untrustworthy Trump regime. This is now, I think, fairly obvious for large swaths of Canadian capital that it's this model of trade accord with the U.S. is just unraveling in and of itself through the internal contradictions, through the nature of the Trump administration. So we need to be putting forward this idea. We have to be challenging the notion of neoliberalism, the whole notion of giving corporations and capital greater power to move their operations, to undermine unions, to weaken labor accords or rights, to undercut environmental accords. That is obviously odious. Now, much more than just that, the whole neoliberal model is really is nothing to do, or tangentially to do, with so-called free trade. It's really about empowering investors and corporations, and obviously you see that with the ISDS agreements that give corporations the right to sue governments. But another part to this that we don't talk about enough is that neoliberalism is basically goes alongside the aggressive expansion of property rights through intellectual property extensions, through patent extensions. And there has been an incredible upward shift in wealth distribution to the big data companies, to the big pharma companies that are basically based upon the last 30 years of strengthening these property rights that to varying degrees barely existed even 30, 40, 50 years ago. So this is an important part of what capitalism, they tell us it's about free trade. They tell us it's about economic liberation, but what it really is about monopolies. That's what patents are. That's what copyright, intellectual rights is about. And so this is an important part of this, of course, is breaking down of this neoliberal kind of ideology offers an opportunity. And what we've seen is this incredible concentration of wealth, right? In Canada, the Thompson family is worth about $100 billion, towards $100 billion. The notion that one family would have such resources is absolutely obscene. The notion there are billionaires is obscene. The notion there's 100 millionaires is obscene. And we have to be putting forward very clear condemnation of that level of concentration of wealth. And as Tom talked about, we have to be expropriating that wealth. Billionaires just simply cannot exist. 100 millionaires simply cannot exist. And we can't say we live in a democracy so long as that's that type of economic divide. Now, also, we're seeing that the ecological crisis is spiraling out of control on so many different levels, not just with the climate crisis, ocean acidification, species collapse, across the board. The logic of capital, the logic of profit, constant profit maximization, of constant growth is simply unsustainable. And that has to be stated clearly. There's far too many environmental groups, environmental activists who are trying to basically work with a segment of so-called green capital to make some shifts here and there. And at the core, a system based upon constant expansion is simply not sustainable, and that has to be stated. And we have to put forward eco-socialist alternatives, which this platform goes some way in doing. Now, from the standpoint of this campaign, the reality is that the NDP has gone in a direction that is so far removed from the times. I mean, the times are one of extreme wealth concentration and ecological collapse. And you have a political party that has basically stopped even using the word, certainly not the word capitalism, and not even the word socialism. I mean, they expunged it, or to a certain extent, expunged it from the constitution of the party, or downgraded it drastically from the constitution of the party a decade ago. And you basically never have anyone within the NDP hierarchy talking about socialism or challenging capitalism. But there is a history there. And we can get into the history of what role the CCF played vis-a-vis the Communist Party and other parties further to the left. There's interesting things to look at there. But there is a history. If you look back at the Regina Manifesto, it did say genuine international cooperation is incompatible with a capitalist regime. It did say replace the present capitalist system. It concluded no CCF government will rest content until it has eradicated capitalism. The Waffle, the late 1960s, early 70s, the Waffle Manifesto also said, quote, capitalism must be replaced by socialism. In the last decade or two, the NDP has not only not challenged capitalism, it hasn't even really challenged neoliberalism. It has supported free trade agreements at different periods. It has refused to support modest social democratic reforms like increasing the tax rate at the top, even in times when the IMF was calling for increasing the tax rate at the top. You had Thomas Mulcair blaming Linda McQuaig, or saying Linda McQuaig's former ideas of a 60 or 70% top tax bracket, that was wrong. So you have a history, recent history, with Mulcair and Jagmeet Singh of being against even fairly modest social democratic reforms. And that's not what we're about. This is really clear. This campaign is about putting forward alternatives, naming the system. Capitalism can't be fixed. Offering alternative in terms of socialist future. Basically, we can't say that we live in a democracy if there's only one person, one vote in the political sphere. There needs to be one person, one vote in the economic sphere. We need economic democracy. The notion that you can have democracy in a situation where you have the Thompson family and their $100 billion and their ownership of the Globe and Mail and their influence within academia, within the think tanks, within business lobby organizations, and then say that we live in some sort of democratic system is absolutely nonsense. Where there is social labor on any significant scale, there needs to be community or cooperative ownership, and there needs to be workplace democracy. Capitalism has socialized the labor process. The vast majority of us work in large firms, work effectively collectively, and yet you have some individuals, because they happen to have a bunch of shares, they run the company. They're the boss. They're the capitalist owner. That's absolutely needs to be challenged, and it needs to be challenged at least at the rhetorical level immediately. And it is, I think, the major contribution of the policy committee with this document to have a genuinely socialist option in this NDP leadership race. And now, just to kind of conclude on the race, there's been attacks in the corporate media instigated by the NDP brass in the last couple of days, where they are distorting this campaign. They are saying we're breaking the rules. They're suggesting that we are sort of shenanigans with our finances, maybe even some suggestion that we're embezzling money. The reality here is that we are following the rules of this leadership race. We understand that there are right-wing forces, there are anti-Palestinian forces that don't want us part of this race, and there are forces within the NDP leadership that don't want us part of this race. And we have not put in for vetting. We have fulfilled the nomination requirements, far surpassed them, and we have fundraised following Elections Canada rules. As the CEO of the NDP, as the chief electoral officer of the NDP, fully understood in communications dating back. Well, we tried to get in contact in August. They finally responded in early September. And we have the communications laid out. We have how we're following the rules laid out. We have not put in for vetting because we understand that there are forces that want three-person backroom committee to block this 1,000 volunteer-led campaign from participation, and that is fundamentally undemocratic. The vetting process that the NDP has is fundamentally undemocratic, and we understand that this struggle is not just a struggle against the billionaire class. It's not just a struggle against the right-wing think tanks and post-media, but this is also a struggle against significant swaths within the NDP that have basically want to just be a liberal light alternative. And so we are moving forward strategically in terms of the moment when we are going to submit for the vetting process so we can maximize our potential to be part of the race. We want to be part of the race. We want access to the 100,000 plus contacts of the NDP. We want to be able to provide donors with tax receipts. We've raised $85,000 without under the restrictions of Elections Canada rules, but not without being able to give the benefit of Election Canada, i.e. the tax credits. We want to be able to do that. The only reason we are pausing on the vetting process is because we want to ensure that any efforts to subvert democracy within the party, that they will at minimum be done with a lot of attention. It won't be quiet, and that we will be in a position to cause as much kerfuffle if they decide to go in that direction. And again, just to conclude on the subject of this talk, this policy platform is an important contribution to this NDP leadership race. And it's an important contribution. The last 3 months of campaigning, we have put the notion of challenging capitalism on the radar more than the NDP entire structure in the past, 5 years or more. And right there, we've contributed a small part, and that's because of the wonderful work of all the hundreds and hundreds of volunteers who've been assisting the campaign. I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yves. Thank you. I mean, first of all, thank you for throwing your hat in the ring. And more generally and broadly, it's having an impact. And also thank you today for highlighting the machinery, both domestically and abroad, that we need to name, that we need to fight. Wonderful to hear from you, and look forward to further discussion during the Q&As. So next up, our final speaker is Kshama Sawant, revolutionary socialist, economist, and former Seattle City Councilor from 2014 to 2024. Kshama helped win the first $15 minimum wage in a major U.S. city, led fights that forced Amazon to pay roughly $250 million a year in taxes to fund social housing, has stood up again and again to corporate power, a modern day legend. We're thrilled to have you, Kshama. Welcome.
Thank you so much for including me in this event. I'm so proud to be here in support of Yves' campaign and all of you there in Canada. International working class solidarity is the only basis forward for humanity and for the planet. I strongly support Yves' campaign and the campaign's demands. And as some of you might already know, I'm running for Congress next year, but we've already launched our campaign against a genocidal Democrat, a Democrat named Adam Smith, who has been in office for 28 years. He voted for tens of billions of dollars for the genocide by the Israeli state in Gaza. He has the blood of 500,000 Palestinians on his hands, according to the estimates by the medical journal The Lancet. Adam Smith also voted for the invasion and occupation of Iraq. He voted to create ICE and repeatedly voted to fund ICE. He also, by the way, voted to block United States funding for United States funding for United Nations food aid to Gaza. This was at the time when already we were hearing massive reports of catastrophic levels of starvation and famine in Gaza. So Democrats like him and the Democratic Party as a whole has paved the way for Trump and the right wing. Both the Democratic and the Republican parties are parties of capitalism and imperialism, and now they are parties of genocide. We need a new party in the United States for the working class. That is why I have always been an independent socialist. As Bianca said, I'm a revolutionary socialist. In our campaign, as independent socialists for the US Congress, we're calling for an end to the genocide and to all US military funding for the Israeli state, which is, as we know, the backbone of the genocide and the occupation. And we are calling for an end to the brutal occupation by the Israeli state of Palestinian lands. We are also calling for a stop to all the deportations and to shut down the detention centers and to shut down ICE. We're also fighting for free healthcare for all, funded by taxing the rich, for national rent control and a massive expansion of publicly funded social housing. And we're also calling for a national $25 an hour minimum wage. If elected to the US Congress, I will use my office the same way that I used my position on the Seattle City Council for 10 years. Through my office, through the approach we used, which we call a fighting strategy, we won. Bianca said, the first major city national, $15 minimum wage that has become the nation's highest minimum wage already. And next year, the minimum wage is going to go up again in Seattle, and it's going to be $21.30. And the reason is that as part of the fight for the $15 minimum wage, our movement through my office also won a major battleground, which was for inflation increases. We also won the Amazon tax, which raises hundreds of millions of dollars annually for affordable housing. And we have won unprecedented renters' rights, many of which are unheard of in most cities across the United States. We won all of this precisely because I was clear and my fellow socialists were clear that this is not going, our job is not to go, when elected as a city council member, my job is not to help administer the capitalist state, except be a little bit nicer to working class people, but to disrupt the capitalist state, to disrupt business as usual under capitalism, which means not to go there and think that the Democratic Party is your friends. And I mentioned the Democratic Party only here because in Seattle, there is no Republican Party establishment. All the council members are Democrats, except for me, I was one socialist. And the approach we used was not doing any backroom deals or negotiations with the Democrats, understanding that the Democratic Party, even though they might have some slight differences with the Republican Party, they are also a party of the bosses. They are also a party of capitalism. And in fact, they proved themselves as such because they opposed every progressive demand that we fought for. And the way we won was by mobilizing working class people, tens of thousands of people, into fighting movements again and again. And also when I say fighting strategy, I don't just mean movement of many people, but also the character of the movements we built had a fighting character, meaning when we came to City Hall and spoke in public comment, our supporters, our volunteers, the people who were part of the movement did not come to City Hall and say, please, Democrats, do the right thing. We said, shame on you if you don't vote yes on this bill that Kshama Sawant has put forward, whether it's renters' rights or $15 an hour or the Amazon tax, that you are exposed as somebody who stands against working class people. So it was the naming and shaming strategy that we used with no illusions that somehow we have to be respectful to the Democrats. We rejected the civility and respectability politics that is actually a weapon that is wielded by capitalism and its spokespeople. Compare the victories we have won, which are tragically for the American working class, they are unparalleled in our times. And compare the victories we have won to the fact that hundreds of the DSA, Democratic Socialists of America, elected officials have won nothing in comparison to that, let alone the prominent progressive Democrats like AOC and Bernie Sanders. The national minimum wage, the federal minimum wage, is still $7.25, and the federal minimum wage for tipped workers is $2.13. It is absolutely disgraceful. So I really agree with all the speakers who have spoken about it's a dead end for the working class, whether it's the NDP or the Democratic Party. When they collaborate with the ruling class, that is a dead end for the working class. That actually is the death knell for the working class. And that is why we have to build movements that are independent of the parties of capitalism. And actually, this is the reason revolutionary socialists actually make the best fighters for and winners of reforms. There is a reason. It is not a coincidence. There is a specific reason why we as revolutionary socialists have won unheard of victories in Seattle, when you have hundreds of people who call themselves socialists in the United States as DSA members have won nothing, absolutely nothing compared to what we have won. And their strategy is of one of collaboration with the Democratic Party. In fact, they are all Democrats. They run as Democrats. And we have rejected that approach. And in fact, this is absolutely the backbone of why we were able to win. And I really agree with the speakers who have said that we will not be able to win for the working class unless we understand that the boss's interests and the needs of the workers and the planet, they are completely irreconcilable. You know, these are irreconcilable class antagonisms, as Karl Marx said, and we cannot hope to actually find any liberation for the working class through the conduit for that cannot be through the organizations and institutions of the bosses themselves. We have to fight against them. And I really agree that capitalism is a zero-sum game. Bosses make profits. The billionaires and the multimillionaires, the uber rich, they make profits at the expense of billions of workers by stealing the value of our labor. And so it's automatically posed. Class struggle is automatically posed under capitalism. There is no peace for the working class. There's never any peace for the working class on the basis of capitalism. Peace, what looks like peace, is only that it's a one-sided class war from the bosses. We, in fact, do have to make it a class war back against the bosses in order to change the balance of forces. So we have to embrace class struggle and class war as a badge of honor for the working class. And we also have to be clear at this moment that there is no end, there is no prospect to an end to the occupation and colonization of the Palestinian lands on the basis of capitalism, because the Israeli state exists as an outpost of capitalist interests. And that is not only US capitalism, obviously that is the main component of it, but it's also the billionaires and multimillionaires in Saudi Arabia, the United Arab Emirates, Egypt, elsewhere. They are all profiting from the existence of the Israeli state and the occupation, and they use the Israeli state as a bulwark against any type of working class rebellion in a region that is resource rich and is geopolitically crucial for the interests of the capitalists. And that is why we have to be very clear about the need to overthrow capitalism, the need for revolutionary socialism, which precisely as Yves said, it means taking the top corporations into democratic public ownership by the workers, because we cannot control what we don't own. So that has to be placed squarely. In closing, about our campaign for Congress, we have a real shot to win. We have a real chance to defeat a genocidal Democrat, Adam Smith. In my view, Adam Smith deserves to be put on trial for war crimes, but the minimum price he needs to pay is to be thrown out of office. If we are elected, this will be nothing short of a political earthquake, because this would be the first ever revolutionary socialist to be elected to the US Congress. And I have pledged that if I'm elected, I will turn my congressional inauguration into a mass rally of 10,000 people, where we will immediately begin a mass movement, mass fight to end all US military funding for the Israeli state and for free healthcare for all funded by taxing the rich. I'll just say at this moment in the United States, what's most urgently needed, in addition to our campaign, which as I said, we have a real chance to win, and it will be a phenomenal breakthrough for the anti-war movement and for working class movements. Alongside that, we need mass strike action. We need strike action that will go towards a general strike in the United States, especially. And that the specific obstacle to that happening is that the labor leadership in the US is tied to the Democratic Party and, in fact, even to the Republican Party now, which are both parties of capitalism. And so we need a rank and file, militant rank and file rebellion, uprising among rank and file union members. And this is also precisely why we have launched Worker Strike Back nationally to help carry that work forward.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Kshama. In listening to what you have to say, it really feels like the impossible can become possible, can become policy when our movements are organized, when we're disciplined, when we're fearless. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Look forward to hearing more from you in the discussion. So we're now going to move into a discussion period, first with the panelists, and then we're going to open up to the audience. Audience, please do put your questions in the Q&A box. That's where it's easiest for us to find them. It's very hard to find them in the general comment section. There's a Q&A box. Please put them there. So first off, to the panelists, and feel free to jump in at any point. The first question I have is about bridging. How do we connect the anti-war work that we're doing to domestic fights? So how do we link anti-war work to things like housing, wages, and services? And I think I'll start with you, Yves.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons for joining the race is because Mark Carney has pursued this radical military turn where he agreed to an extra $9 billion to the military budget this year to be spent by the end of March to get the 2% of GDP NATO target. And then he agreed at the NATO summit to go to 5%, as Donald Trump was demanding or requesting of NATO. And that will mean an extra $100 billion a year to the war machine. And that is invariably coming at the expense of social programs and social entitlements. When Mark Carney 2 weeks ago announced his big housing strategy, 100,000 plus living in abject misery on the streets across the country, and Mark Carney announced $1 billion for homelessness, $1 billion over multiple years. One of these surface combatant naval vessels they're building right now on the East Coast is that's about 1/8 of the cost of one of the surface naval combatant naval vessels, and they're buying 15 of those, and they're buying 15 of those naval vessels that have the Tomahawk missiles that can shoot 1,500 kilometers, so they could be somewhere maybe around Miami and they could hit Caracas. That's what we're putting our resources into building, so the Canadian Navy can assist the US empire's global power projection. It's obviously an outrage. There's no one in the dominant media contrasting the resources going to the military versus the resources going to social housing. There's not even really anyone in the NDP that's making that contrast. And unfortunately, we've seen in the last few weeks, I'd say an improvement with the Draw the Line protests, but even the labor movement and the sort of left NGO world has mostly ignored Canadian militarism. Carney's militarism is so radical that I think there is a little bit of a shift there, and the Draw the Line protests raised the military spending. So I think we have to put those numbers before people's eyes. And we talk about like a security threat, that's the notion of Russia or China or Iran attacking, when you have 100,000 plus people living in abject misery, when you have hundreds of thousands of people who were displaced from their homes, predominantly indigenous people over the summer because of forest fires and like. So the climate crisis is obviously a far bigger security threat than the notion of Russia invading or the like. So we have to be able to put this before people. That's campaigning. I think that there's a lot of support for that kind of, put the money into human welfare versus warfare. But it has to start somewhere. And unfortunately, the anti-war movement and the unions and the NDP has done very, very little of that in recent years.
Thank you, Yves. Anyone else?
Yeah, I could jump in. Yeah, to like echoing, of course, everything that Yves says, but also just like we live in globalized world. Like no country is truly autonomous. Like any decision that's made here or abroad about sanctions or trade pacts or resource extraction, arms contracts, like it's directly shaping our job markets, prices, supply chains, social services. And then wars tend to accelerate austerity. So just as Yves said, like they're cutting social programs. I mean, we immediately saw it as soon as Mark Carney announced the increased military spending with the mail here. So yeah, I mean, it's all connected. It's just that those connections are never made clear to us, but they're 100% there.
100%. Kshama, Tom, any comment?
I just say that of course, it's not an accident that this information is not being widely circulated, and the history of the workers' movement shows that when levels of struggle are high, there are more benefits flowing out. So if there was more trouble going on about the lack of housing, about homelessness, et cetera, I mean, organized opposition, there would be more money flowing in that direction. There's the lack of effective organization of the far left and workers' movement, despite the enormous potential, which I'm hopeful that this campaign can do something to address, perhaps, accounts for a lot of the ability of the capitalists to get away with whatever they want. I think it's very important to understand that the warmongering and the arming is not incidental. It's a necessary part of participation in a global imperialist world order that the Canadian ruling class is integrated into. There are going to be wars. There's going to be prices to be paid, but there's also going to be benefits to be derived from carving up valuable territory with valuable resources or stealing new markets, et cetera. And if you want to participate in the carve up, you've got to contribute to the muscle that goes in and steals this stuff. That's basically how it operates. It is necessary to understand the structure of the world capitalist economy as a mechanism that was set up, at least under after World War II, largely by the Americans. It's a mechanism to funnel wealth from the very poor people to the richest people, and from the poor countries to the rich ones. That's to extract value. Net value is the definition of imperialism. Canada's role in that is as an auxiliary, a sidekick. We're not a big major player, and we are having frictions now with our American imperialist ally, senior. But historically, Canada, for instance, in Vietnam, went in as a brave neutral mediator and provided secret reports on negotiations to the Americans. In the Poles, I think, were doing the same for the Soviets. But it's not possible. We can't abstract war from the operation of the capitalist economy on a global level. And so the effective way to fight war, really, we're only going to be as effective as we are in terms of building an effective socialist organization. That's one front on which we will have to confront capital, but it's not a separate, unique area. I'm not alleging anyone is saying that.
Thank you, Tom. Kshama?
Yeah, just to add to what other speakers have said, really, I think it's an incredible moment we live in where ordinary working class people are themselves making many of these connections, between the war and genocide and the continual precariousness that we as working people are subjected to, even in the richest countries, some of the richest countries of the world, and in the case of the US, it's especially striking. So just to take some examples from the United States, actually, it is an unprecedented moment in history that the majority of the American working class is against genocide. It's against the Israeli state. This has never happened, since the inception of Israel. This has never happened. So it's really a very crucial moment for us to keep building the anti-war movement. And in fact, a lot of people they may not be aware of the exact numbers, but they understand that just insane tens of billions of dollars are being flushed into the genocide, while ordinary people here are struggling to keep a roof over their head and put food on their table for their families. And so just to look at a couple of examples, like last year, we saw statistics that came out, the last year was the presidential election year. And so 20 million people, these are Democratic Party voters, 20 million people who voted for Biden in 2020 refused to vote at all last year. They didn't vote for Trump. They just didn't vote at all. And the top two reasons they gave in this poll was the genocide and the cost of living crisis. So people are making those connections. And even among the Republican Party, it's actually pretty stunning. Only 25% of Republican Party voters, aged 18 to 34, support the genocide. So it is quite a shift. What is missing, I would say, especially in the United States, but I think this applies internationally as well. What is missing is any type of leadership in the labor movement or in social movements in general that will fight on either the working class demands or against the genocide and the occupation. So this is a huge opening for us to build the left, but we really have to urgently build the leadership. And that is why these types of international connections that we're making here today are super crucial.
Thank you, Kshama. My next question is specifically for Jasmine. I'm wondering, what are some ways that volunteers, people who are listening in on this webinar, people who are already part of this campaign, people who've heard about Capitalism Can't Be Fixed, what are ways that they can engage with the policy platform? How can they help to make it better? How can they help to spread it around?
Yeah, I think the way that I've seen people engage with it already, they already feel like they can make suggestions and add to it, which is so amazing because I've gotten just 2 DMs on my Instagram already, which is just kind of crazy, saying like, oh, we should change this, or oh, do you have a policy on this? I'd love to see that. And I think that really speaks to like what this campaign has championed right from the start, which is like ground up, people first. But yeah, we have a Google form for people to submit policy suggestions, revisions, additions, because it's just going to keep evolving. So yeah, that's going to be posted on the website coming up soon. And we're probably going to continue doing outreach also to people and just make sure that, yeah, the document just reflects the struggles that people face, because we are an activist campaign. So yeah.
Thank you, Jasmine. My next question is specifically for Tom. You talked a lot about your organizing in the past, in the 70s, and I'm wondering, do you have any organizing tactics that you think we should be reviving?
Well, the fundamental problem, which Kshama touched on, is the question of leadership in the working class. The working class is important in terms of social change because it makes money for capital, and when it stops working, money stops flowing. They're very sensitive to that. They don't really care about what's happening to people's families or how much pain is inflicted on orphans or whatever. But workers do have, not all equally, of course, but organization of the working class is a very powerful way to extract things from the capitalists, pending the working class getting well enough organized to get rid of the capitalists altogether, which is, of course, what the Socialist Project's about. The critical thing in my experience, the most important and the most beneficial activities are, of course, the most difficult to achieve. And what that has been, in my experience, has been to have relatively small groups of politically conscious workers in particular unions. I know there were workers in the phone union when it was important, in the steel workers, in auto. Particularly, I had some familiarity with the longshore union, particularly on the West Coast, and workers who have socialist aspirations get together and work out a common program, are close enough politically to each other to cooperate, and on that basis intervene in the union to make proposals, to make counter proposals, to criticize what bureaucrats are doing. And if it's all done, if it's done very skillfully by people who are very dedicated, it takes a long time to develop. I mean, it's a question of years. It's not something you can do next week, but sometimes it can have very powerful results. I was involved in one case where in the Bay Area, there was a longshore movement with different leftists involved, some of whom I was close to. One of whom I was close to put forward a motion after a lot of work had gone on in the union to stop the next ship with South African cargo in 1984. And they shut down a ship with South African cargo for 11 days. The Italian workers, of course, operate on a much larger scale, but that was an actual event that took place. I'd be very surprised if among the Italian workers, if there aren't 4 nodules of cadres who sit around in somebody's kitchen, make a decision, and on next Tuesday, we're going to put forward this motion, and we will coordinate it with the following people in the following 8 cities. As I say, that's a lot of infrastructure to develop, but that's how power really starts to get exercised. And that's the most important form of organizing, in my opinion.
Thank you, Tom. Continuing on the subject of organizing, the next question is Kshama. What can we say to our supporters, people on this call, who are serious about building socialist power? There's someone getting a bit ahead of myself, but Anthony in the Q&A said, mass mobilization. Had a question for you, like how can we mobilize, say, 1,000 activists, like the 1,000 activists supporting this campaign, for instance, to picket, to ensure that our campaign doesn't get blocked, but also other, useful mass actions. How can we really show ourselves as the force that we are in terms of being many?
Yeah, I really appreciate that question, because ultimately that is what it comes down to, is how do we actually build working class solidarity, active, mobilize working class people actively into a struggle. I think the starting point is always having a clear understanding of the way, obviously everything that we were just talking about, like it's a non-starter if we are not clear that the campaign or whatever we launch, and I'll come to that in a second, like concretely what should we do, but the underpinnings of that has to be an independent mobilization. In other words, the leadership of any effort, of any working class effort, has to be crystal clear that they are going to be independent of the parties of capitalism. That also means, and Yves was referring to this earlier, is that also means that you have to recognize gatekeepers when they come in front of you. Because, just to give you a concrete example, when we were fighting for the Amazon tax in 2020, it's not obviously the main enemies, the actual power brokers who are against us and who were against us are the actual capitalists, including Jeff Bezos. And obviously, he very much hated the idea of the Amazon tax. It was not just that Amazon was going to pay, but Amazon as a corporation was going to pay the biggest chunk. And so obviously the billionaires who have a stake in Amazon were completely dead against it. And also the other billionaires were. So those are the actual enemies. But as far as the movement building is concerned, the enemies are not the actual billionaires who come and oppose you on a day-to-day basis. The people who actually do the billionaires' bidding are, in our case, of course, it was a Democratic Party politicians, including some of the most progressive, like the people who call themselves progressive. In fact, 2 of the Latina, women of color Democrats played some of the most vicious role against the Amazon tax. They even ran a candidate against me in my re-election in 2019, and they helped Amazon there. They didn't succeed, but that is what they did. And so the enemies of the working class come in those forms. The enemies of the working class also come in the form of labor leadership who will apply the brakes, who will say, well, I agree with you, but you know what? Now is not the time. That's too ambitious. We're not going to win. Hey, look, I agree with you, but we can't do this right now because nobody else will. That is the type of death that any campaign dies in the back rooms. And that is why the starting point has to be a group of people who are crystal clear that they are not going to stand up, that they're not going to stand for gatekeepers. They're going to brush aside the gatekeepers and launch a campaign publicly that is in full public view. That is the only basis on which we have won. Even when we were, when we ran our first election campaign in 2013 and $15 an hour was our flagship demand, I cannot tell you the number of times labor leaders literally came and shouted at my face saying, you can't talk about 15, you don't have the right to do that. And the reason they didn't was because they knew that for us to publicly put forward the demand of 15, put them on the hook, because workers and their own union members are going to ask them, hey, how come our leadership is not supporting this? Kshama Sawant and the socialists are fighting for 15. Shouldn't we be part of that? Because it got huge support. Every time we have launched a campaign on that basis, where we are in full public view and we don't allow the gatekeepers to hold us in shackles, it gets huge support. So that's the starting point. After that, I think the other thing to know for us is that we have to base ourselves on concrete demands. And the way we did it was by always providing the context of revolutionary ideas, explaining to people that capitalism doesn't work and we're not here to make compromises with capitalism. We need revolutionary movements and all of that. But all of that has to be accompanied with concrete demands in the here and now. And we have to understand that that is what mobilizes people. Because, when we said $15 an hour, which was going to be an almost 70% jump in the hourly wages of some of the hundreds of thousands of poorest workers, they were immediately on board, as opposed to if I had just said, well, I'm against capitalism. What we did was we said that, but then we we mobilized around concrete demands. And so by that, using concrete demands and then always having a next step. So for example, if you're announcing your campaign at a public press conference, then have the next step ready, meaning we're going to build a new rally coming up in a month or so, and we're going to be, we want you to come there, we want you to fight alongside us, then we'll take a march to City Hall or the state legislature, whatever, whatever the case may be. And I think just one last thing I'll say is that in order to really mobilize people at this moment for your campaign, I would say, bring up such concrete demands, taxing the rich, taxing big business, have livable wages, whatever the demands are, and actually organize around it, which means in our case, what we do is our volunteers and our fellow socialists, we always have tables at public locations, outside the train station, at farmers markets, in busy neighborhoods, outside grocery stores. And by that kind of act, we end up talking to tens of thousands of people, masses upon masses of people, and it immediately gets a buzz about the campaign. So I would say that at this moment, it would be really important for your campaign to do this, at least, identify some key, obviously yours is a national campaign, identify some key cities where we can actually start organizing around concrete demands, and then, organize a rally around it, really put pressure on the NDP leadership as well. And that will also, get people involved in your campaign in a big way.
Thank you. Sage advice from Kshama. So the last question I have for you as panelists, and I'll start with Yves, is kind of a follow-up, about what you're saying about like having this campaign out in the public, right? And also people saying, oh, you're saying we should do this, and kind of making certain people look bad because they're not asking for it, and so on and so forth. So, and there's also someone in the chat that's asking about this, which is, what do you say to people when they say, oh, your platform is not realistic, this socialism is not realistic, this, these ideas are not socialist, are not realistic. Someone asked us, Josh, do you view your program as a set of ideals or a set of policies that can actually be passed and implemented? So I want to hear from you all, what do we say to people that, to beat this, it's unrealistic line? I'm going to start with Yves.
Well, obviously there's an aspirational element to the platform, but almost all the policies could be adopted basically overnight, one by one. I mean, there's, in terms of nationalizing major sectors, that takes a certain amount of logistical um, adoption and whatnot. So that's not, overnight, but the bulk of the policies can be adopted overnight. Now it's a question of political power. That's the real key here, is not just the vision. And it's about building that, and that's what we're trying to do with the how the policy was created and the campaign, and the openness of that, I think, is all part of that, right? We're open, that we understand that this is a struggle, uh, also with regards to the internal NDP structure, right? The NDP could have and should have been talking about the real estate investment trusts that have control over rental market, significant chunks of the rental market in many cities, that these could be turned into co-ops. That's what we're proposing. These can be turned into co-ops. It's not logistically difficult. There's long history of turning different properties into cooperative control, cooperative ownership. So that's totally doable. But there's been little political appetite, because over the past 30 years, there's been a whole model that says if you can't make a profit off of housing, then it's not legitimate. But everyone knows, or should know, or believe that housing is a fundamental right. I mean, even the Trudeau government ostensibly says housing is a fundamental right, and then doesn't do anything to ensure that that right is upheld. And so what we're calling for with the turning the real estate investment trusts into cooperative housing, it would, some logistical issues there. It's not going to happen. That's not an overnight question, but that is certainly could be done in pretty short order. And same thing with things like abolishing tuition. That would be a big step forward for millions of young people, principally. But it's not a totally radical idea. I mean, there are dozens of countries that have a free education. And then when you talk about like paying for that, people say, "Oh, how would you? It's $23 billion to eliminate all outstanding student debt." Well, $23 billion is that's what the contract with Irving. That's the upfront contract for 3 of the surface combatant naval vessels. So instead of getting 15 of the surface combatant naval vessels, and I should say that's just the upfront cost, the life cycle costs of the naval vessels is probably about 3 times that. The contract is 22 and a bit billion dollars to Irving. That would wipe out all outstanding student debt in the country. Just buy 3 less of the only 12 of these naval vessels that can shoot 1,500-kilometer Tomahawk missiles. So the money is there. It's not a particularly difficult to pay for it. But it's a question of power, and let's be honest to ourselves. This is almost all of the institutions, the ideological and political institutions, don't want to talk about this. From the the post media, the right wing media, down to the Toronto Star and the CBC, down to the sort of establishment think tanks, down to most of academia, down to most of the unions. They don't want to talk about how much we're putting into the war machine versus how much we're putting into social housing. That there's just not an appetite for that discussion. We're so tied into a militaristic, nationalistic political culture. And so it's a matter of social movements, in this case, insurgent left, political campaign within the NDP. It's a matter of those pushing forward these ideas. There's a lot more appetite for these ideas than is conveyed in the dominant media. But it's a matter of building the power to actually make it happen.
Thank you, Yves. Any other comments from panelists?
Yeah,
I'd just say that that consciousness is differentiated, and things that appear unrealistic to many people, some people who see further or more deeply can see that it, in fact, is the only practical solution. By gathering those people, the more advanced ones, together into some kind of organized formation that is capable of acting in an organized sort of way, as what Kshama was talking about, setting up tables at grocery stores and train stations, et cetera, it's possible then to communicate with broader layers. So there's an organizational aspect. It's not just a matter of getting the right idea or having the right formula. As you become more of a factor, more and you have more organizational capacity, you begin to seem real. Your solutions seem more real to larger people. Finally, I would also say to larger numbers of people. I think that it's also very true, though, that you have an abstract idea like we were opposed to apartheid on the West Coast in the ILWU, but you need to concretize it. There's a ship coming next Tuesday with apartheid cargo. That's the one we'll hit. And when you're successful, it's because you've been able to concretize a broader, and everyone understands that it's like apartheid's not going to stand or fall on basically what happens to this ship, but it's a way to organize consciousness and to broaden the appeal. And if it was to spread, as it has apparently in Italy, it starts to have material factor. Obviously, if the American workers were behaving like the Italian ones, Israel would be finished.
Thank you, Tom. Any other comment, Jasmine?
Yeah, I wanted to point out that we have a great line in the policy document that says, we're told time and time again that economic growth must come before investment in social services. In truth, the reverse is clear. Neglecting people's basic needs holds the economy back. And it's true, like when we were doing research for the platform on homelessness, it costs more to service homelessness than it does to just fix the problem. Because, healthcare, police costs, everything like that. So like, we're constantly being made to serve this capitalist system, and capitalism's goals have always just come first. And like our platform just fundamentally reverses that. And also, like, I don't think people realize how much of a corporate welfare state the Canadian government has been and is. Like if you look at some of the biggest companies in Canada, like you'll find that a lot of them were crown corporations that were sold very cheaply. So, the government took on all the risk, all the investment, and then passed it off to now like these billionaires today. So like the money is there. It's just entirely about priorities.
100%. The money is there. We have the money. We have the money to pay for it. Thank you. So that concludes our discussion amongst panelists. Before taking the audience questions, we're going to hear a word from our incredible mobilization and outreach lead, Jason. Handing it over to you, Jason.
Thanks, Bianca. No easy task following that panel, that's for sure. But I think the crux of what is one of the key things that's come out of this discussion for me, and it's kind of at the center of this campaign, and that is the kind of decades of lack of leadership that we have not had in this country. That in my entire lifespan, there has never been a socialist challenge to the status quo, to neoliberalism, to free markets, to endless war, to environmental degradation. Everybody has just put forward nickel and dime solutions, and sometimes not even that. Okay, so we have it's been mentioned consistently this throughout the evening, and what this is a campaign for leadership of the NDP. We view leadership as a collective process, and I think that is precisely how the policy committee has built their work. It was 45, 47 people that had very long discussions, as people can imagine, to discuss this platform. And from the beginning of this campaign, we've always taken the idea that we have to mobilize from the bottom up. And that is exactly how we've done it. Yves went out to small towns, getting huge turnouts. 40 people in Hamilton, 40 people at lunchtime in St. Catharines, Ontario, 30 in London, 100 people plus in Victoria. A smashing success, absolute smashing success. Without a doubt, the biggest gathering of the far left in the history of Victoria in modern times, I can state unequivocally. 60 people in Burnaby, 40 people in Winnipeg. What we have noticed consistently through this campaign is that working class towns, smaller cities, there is a tremendous opportunity and appetite for socialist ideas because they're not present in those communities. They're always present in Toronto and Montreal, Vancouver, the kind of bigger cities. But in the smaller towns, there's been a kind of lack of bottom-up socialist politics that had not existed on a mainstream. And we are able to continue this strategy. We are able to go into smaller towns and confidently predict that we can build groups around the ideas of this campaign for socialism and people's bottom-up democracy. And that's exactly how we view this platform. That, the NDP would never take an idea. As an example, the LEAP manifesto was passed at the NDP convention, and it was supposed to be discussed at all the riding association levels. The only one that had it, as far as I know, was one that when I was president of Toronto Centre NDP, we had it. And they fought me all the way tooth and nail to organize a meeting of the members to discuss the LEAP manifesto. But what are we doing? We are not being held back in this campaign. This campaign of Yves Engler for socialism to transform society is opened up the door. They've let the dog off the leash to run free. We are running free. They are being allowed to mobilize from the bottom up to transform society, to go to Palestine protests, to distribute our ideas. And we will be doing that with the platform. We will be printing up this brilliant document, the most transformative political document since the Waffle Manifesto on a mass scale in Canada. And we will be printing that up. It will be distributing it, discussing it in all the groups that we have that have been starting to develop around the country. And it will be an organizing tool for us to discuss our ideas, to engage with people at protests, Palestine solidarity protests, to show them that we are serious about transforming society. And the point that Tom made about how it is really, the kind of very serious, conscious elements that are going to come to our campaign. Our vetting process is the vetting process of ordinary working people and the oppressed sticking together to liberate humanity from the chains of capitalism. It's going to contest this contest. You cannot fake socialism. You can copy and paste our ideas, but what comes out of the mouths of Yves Engler or Bianca or whomever is mobilizing in this campaign for socialism from the bottom up, you cannot fake our authenticity. And working people can tell that. And that's why they are gravitating to our campaign. That's why our events are the biggest in the country. And that's why we will continue to grow from strength to strength. I don't know about you, Bianca, but after that speech, I'm thinking maybe I might want to get my wallet out and give a little bit of a donation myself to this campaign. So I don't know. Could you put the fundraising link possibly?
I can do that.
I'm a bit of a tech schmo, so I need to kind of
type. Yes, I can type the donation link. It is Yves Engler for ndpleader.ca/donate. Thank you so much, Jason. Thank you for that. You do define the old adage, organize. And I don't know how you do it, but this is the kind of energy that wins. So we're now going to move into the audience Q&As. We're already an hour and 28 minutes into our event and have 37 questions that have been entered into the Q&A box. I'm going to get to some of them, not a lot of them, but I'm going to get to some of them. And a lot of them actually overlap as well, which is, so getting to some of them is actually getting to a lot of them. So the first question is for Kshama, and it's from Anthony, from Matt rather. And Matt says, how do you see, for Kshama and Yves, how do you see your roles together in fighting similar powers despite doing so in separate countries? So I'll start with you, Kshama.
Sorry, how do we see our roles despite we're fighting in?
Yeah, so I guess what are the overlaps? Where are the connections? How do you see your roles together in fighting these similar powers separately?
Yeah, I think first of all, I should say that it is actually quite an unprecedented development that we are actually here and talking about concrete campaigns, concrete fight back on an international basis. In our lifetimes, it has become rare or almost non-existent. And I think we should see this meeting for what it is, really hopefully, potentially, a historic beginning of this type of international working class connections, socialist connections, where we can build movements in parallel. So I think that it is potentially momentous, and I say potentially only because I think the potential is there, but to make it happen, we will need to keep working. So I would say, first of all, I think we all of us, from our end in my organization, Workers Strike Back, which is the broader organization, and my revolutionary organization, Revolutionary Workers, and then for you all, for all of us, there's a real responsibility on our shoulders. And it's a dual responsibility. On the one hand, we have to build fighting movements and really revolutionary class struggle in our own nations. But at the same time, we also have to build international links for the working class struggle. And really, those two things go together. You cannot do one without the other. In fact, you can see the absolutely perilous pitfalls that the labor leadership in the United States and also actually in Canada have fallen into in response to Trump's tariffs, where labor leaders in both nations have taken a nationalistic position, and it is completely fatal and it is nonsensical. If you look at the way that the global capitalist system and the global capitalist class functions, it's a completely nonsensical position and it's a fatal position. But the reason they have fallen into that trap, and it's really the working class that will pay the price for it, not they themselves, is that they have no analysis about capitalism itself. They have accepted the bounds of capitalism, and that all the mistakes they make flows from that. So I think we have a grave responsibility on our shoulders to push back against that. I'll just say that obviously right now, the best thing we can do to build this international working class movement is to do the best that we can in Yves' campaign and the best that we can in our campaign, because winning concretely is going to push the way forward. So first of all, let's be clear, that is our responsibility. And I think in the coming weeks and months, we should deepen this connection in whatever way possible. So for example, Eve and others, Tom and others coming and speaking at our events, and for us to maybe come again at your events and really invite a broader mass of people from the United States, which we weren't able to do today. But if we can bring in hundreds of working class people from Canada, hundreds of working class people from the US, and build for a big Zoom meeting jointly for both campaigns, I would say that is the most immediate thing we can do together. But obviously, separately, we should be building our campaigns on the ground for as strongly as possible. And then beyond that, I would say that it would be really helpful, and this will be the bedrock of anything we will be able to do in the future, is actually build a joint international organization where we may, we should have discussion and debate within the organization. Of course, there will be disagreements, and that is the only way to really have a live democratic organization, is to have open debate and discussion on all the issues that need to be discussed. But if we can have ongoing collaboration where we are organizing together, where we are sending our working class people to Canada to help out in your campaigns, and you are all coming here, and also if through that organization we can build an international website of articles where we write jointly about many things like the tariffs and like the genocide, why we are insisting on internationalism, and why we have to be implacable in refusing to collaborate with the ruling class, why we have to be absolutely resistant to any nationalistic position. All of that, I think, will be hugely educational to working class people, and will provide a concrete example for socialists and working class fighters in other countries.
Yeah, that was wonderful. I don't have much to add, but I think that obviously there is the fact that there are direct challenges to capital and direct challenges to the Democratic Party structure, socialist kind of insurgency. There's inspiration that happens with that happening in Kshama's campaign. And I think, with regards to our NDP leadership campaign, and concretely, I mean, we live in a nation state structure as of now, but obviously, Seattle and the coast with Vancouver and the the closeness, that's a much more logically cohesive kind of political structure with time as the nation state structure, border structure is weakened and diminished. So I think we have to keep that in mind, that the current way even the borders are structured don't really make sense from a combination of cultural, ecological, and other reasons. And so, the campaign of Sean Orr in Vancouver City Council, I think, is in part inspired by Kshama's successes in Seattle.
Thank you, Yves. Comments from any of the other panelists? All right, so the next question we have is from Clark. Why should we bash our heads against an establishment wall, asks Clark. Instead of asking the NDP to liberate us, why can't we liberate ourselves? Tom?
Well, we can ask the NDP for anything we want, and we can ask the Liberals for anything we want. I think that this is actually, I think that this is a very good strategy for making a major preliminary step in the direction of possibly reconfiguring a sizable chunk of left-wing opinion in Canada. That is, organizing it. I think Jason made a very good point earlier about when you go into small places where there aren't pre-existing leftist formations, all these ideas make perfect sense to a lot of people. They've already figured out a lot of it. There's no way to connect to anything. And so, next week you have to worry about something else and you lose interest and you fizzle away. I think a lot of the potential success of this venture is to connect people and to remain connected. And whatever happens with the NDP, I mean, Yves will be busy when he's prime minister, I guess. But between now and then, we'll probably have some opportunities to build more lasting organizational connections in some form or another.
Thank you, Tom. Anyone else interested in contributing to that question about the NDP and liberation?
All I would say, I don't. It's obviously not an either or. I think that I mean, that seems pretty self-evident that this is one part of a much broader left organization and social movement and dynamic working class organization and mobilization.
Thank you. So this question may be more for the Canadians working on the platform. Norman wants to know whether Capitalism Can't Be Fixed has any programs that will teach Canadians about pioneer Black socialists like Jean Daniels, Leonard Johnston, Jack White, and other unsung advocates for social justice. Jasmine.
I mean, we don't have that specific policy in the platform, but we do have, we did discuss just like mass education, because it's kind of necessary for us to go forward and, on the revolutionary side of things, but, definitely also on settler colonialism. There's a lack of conversation on how that affects our domestic politics. And, it needs to be incorporated more into the education system, into regular discussions. It's not a word that Canadians are very familiar with, and it's kind of crazy because it's our lived reality. So yeah, we're fully thinking about the education side of things.
Thank you, Jasmine. Yves, Tom?
I just want to add one really concrete thing. I mean, it's tangential to this, but the policy platform calls for Canada out of the core group in Haiti, and that's something the NDP officially endorsed in 2021. So in terms of anti-Black racism, this is basically Canada, the U.S., France, Brazil, and Spain that has been dictating Haitian affairs since overthrowing the government 20 years ago. And it concretely, as many Haitian activists have pointed out, it's basically white guys, sometimes women, but mostly white guys in Haiti, a country, of course, that born in the most important uprising against white supremacy, the Haitian Revolution, so it's not framed as this like extreme racism of Canada, but that's what the core group is. It's just a flagrant, in-your-face imperialist racism that, like I said, in 2021, the NDP officially endorsed the core group. So just that's a little bit of a non sequitur, but there is a very concrete challenge to explicit anti-Black Canadian racism.
Thank you, Yves. Anyone else care to comment on that? All right, so Alex, who's a member of our campaign, says he recently listened to a podcast about the success of Zora and Mamdani's campaign. And a point that jumped out to Alex was how they grew their ranks through mentorship, training. And then another person in the comments said, thank you, Kshama, for your fierceness, individuality, education. Is it possible to work with Mamdani? So there's a number of questions, actually, five questions in the chat about Mamdani. Obviously, people are thinking about him a lot. So I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Oh, this is my kid, Zuri, and she needs the bathroom. So I'm going to go in a sec. I'm going to go and help her. But Kshama, if you could answer that, and anyone else, that'd be great.
Can somebody read out the
I don't
question?
I don't have the exact question in front of me, but it was about Mamdani and how Mamdani had a mobilization effort on his campaign where younger volunteers were kind of mentored by older volunteers, and then they would move up, and then they would do that same mentorship program. And then she extended the question, just kind of making some parallels, asking, I guess, is there a connection that we can make with Mamdani?
Yeah, so obviously Mamdani's campaign is is throwing up a lot of questions in terms of what is it that working class people should do. And I think first of all, the campaigns, so the demands that the campaign has brought up, Mamdani's campaign has brought up, free transit, publicly owned grocery stores, and keep in mind, publicly owned meaning owned by the city. And also, he doesn't talk about this much, but a $30 an hour minimum wage, which we strongly support. So suffice it to say that, of course, Workers' Strike Back and we strongly support the working class demands that Mamdani's campaign has brought forward. And if the working class in New York are able to win any of these demands, then it's going to be a huge step forward for working class people in general. So we want the working class to win those demands. We just don't believe that somehow just Zoran Mamdani is going to be that one historical anomaly that is going to buck the statistics of and the analysis of what we think happens when you end up being preoccupied with making building cordial relations with the billionaire class and their spokespeople. I think that is where the fatal flaw lies. And so we think that the demands are important. And I also actually appreciate that Mamdani has been very focused on his demands. Every time he speaks publicly, he speaks about the demands. That's important. And it's also important that the campaign has mobilized tens of thousands of working class people, young people. All of this is important. However, we don't agree that the Mamdani strategy of trying to, first of all, running as a Democrat, and then also trying to make himself as amenable as possible to the Democratic Party establishment, let alone to billionaires, is the way for the working class. Now, is he going to win the election on that basis? I'm sure he can win. I mean, AOC has won multiple elections. Bernie Sanders has won elections. Lots of people have won elections. That's not the question I would ask myself. The question is, how can we win for the working class? Obviously, for us, winning victories in Seattle has been crucial to also winning the concrete demands that we are running on. But we have never run a campaign, not once, and we don't intend to, on the basis of, oh, okay, let me make compromises right now because that will help me win the election, and then I will fight for working class people. That logic, I mean, I don't know what Mamdani is thinking. This is not about him. I can't divine. I have no mind reading skills. I can't divine what's in his mind. I'm talking about the outcomes of the strategy of doing what he's doing. I mean, what is he doing? He is, first of all, running as a Democrat. He is very much engaged in trying to get the approval of the Democratic Party. One of the first things he did after he won the primary was keep in mind, he initiated a meeting with the billionaire class, and he asked for a second meeting with the billionaire class. He has repeatedly asked for meetings with Chuck Schumer and Hakeem Jeffries. These are Cory Booker. These are all like absolutely arch entrenched rottenest of the rotten Democrats in the rotten Democratic Party. These are these people. We would never ever think that is the way to go for the working class, because here's the deal. If the pressures are high on you when you're running for office, those pressures are going to magnify exponentially when you are in office, because the capitalist class and their representatives, they are not going to give 1 inch. And if they see that they can push you into compromising, push you into agreeing with them, bending to them, they smell blood in the water and they go for more. They go for the kill. So there is no logic that leads from, oh, let me compromise a little bit today and then tomorrow I will stand up for workers. No, the logic always leads to more compromises, more sellouts. So this cannot be about Mamdani's intentions. A lot of people will ask me, oh, do you think he's well-intentioned or not? I'm like, I don't know. It's in his brain. I'm not a mind reader. What I can tell you is that even if you assume that he is proceeding from the best of intentions, this is going to be the result of his strategy. And that is why we as revolutionary socialists cannot be in the business of misleading working class people just because maybe some people will disagree with us now. Although I have to be honest, a lot more people are agreeing with us now than right after he won the primary, because they're seeing the effect of what he's doing. I'll just give you one concrete example. He is calling for a rent freeze in the million or so rent stabilized apartments in New York. We support that. We would have to call for rent control for the whole city as well, and also for a massive expansion of social housing. But we support demands that we think are not as ambitious also, because even winning that will take an almighty fight against corporate landlords and Wall Street as a whole. However, right after he won the primary, the rent control board met and they increased the rents after he won the primary and became an international superstar. And he mobilized nothing against the rent control board. What we were saying is that if we had won that primary, we would have called for a mass rally outside the rent control board meeting and shut down the rent control board meeting and prevented them from making any rent increases. It makes no sense to me to say that you're running on doing a rent freeze, and then while you're running for office and you become a superstar, you are not fighting you're not mobilizing your 50,000 volunteers to a rally. Easily, he could have mobilized tens of thousands of people outside the rent control board. I also think his recent statement, actually from the day before yesterday, this was on the October 7th. I would urge people to contrast his statement from the statement we released. In his statement on the genocide, he obviously condemns the genocide, but he does what I would call both sidesism. He says how horrible Hamas, this, all of that. And then he poses the colonized, oppressed people of the Palestinian on par with what Israel has been carrying out, which is state terrorism bankrolled by US capitalism. We would never do that. And I think he has taken a lot of flack from the left, justly so. He deserved that. Because people don't want those both sides anymore. And in fact, it is also a miscalculation on his part of how phenomenally that working class consciousness in America has moved to the left on the issue of genocide since he won the primary. Actually, it has been a major shift. And so I think when you try to appease the bosses, you end up selling out the workers, but you don't actually appease the bosses either, because they want nothing short of the full thing, meaning absolutely unadulterated devotion to their interests. And if you give them anything short of that, they will try to crucify you. And in the process, you will sell out working class people. You will demoralize working class people. And that is why, for us, the rule of thumb is that if any Democrat, like New York State Governor Kathy Hochul, who is an out and out corporate Democrat, she's completely opposed to taxing the wealthy. She has endorsed Zoran Mamdani. For us, the rule of thumb is, if somebody like Kathy Hochul endorsed me, I would really wonder what the hell I'm doing wrong to invite that endorsement, because for the capitalist class and their spokespeople, they understand very clearly where we are. They understand, they have no illusions about who we are, and also they have no illusions about how effective we have been. We have not just been spokespeople for Marxism, we have won concrete victories that we have wrested from the hands of the capitalists. We have shown how it can be done. And that is why they know that, again, talking about the class antagonisms, they know that those two can never meet. And so starting point is, you don't run as a Democrat, you run independent and you build independently. Not that running independently is a guarantee, but it's a necessary condition. And then you have to also have a fighting movement behind you.
Brilliant. Thank you. Anyone else care to comment on the sort of the Mamdani moment or follow up from Kshama's comments? All right, so before we close, and we do have to close, even though this is riveting, I actually would love to keep talking. I'd love a final thought from each of you about any of the following. What gives you the most hope right now? What this fight for socialism really means, and what our movement for socialism, what this fight for socialism should do next. And I'll start with you, Tom.
Well, I think that the what's hopeful about this moment, and what's hopeful about the campaign, is the amount of support that we've been getting. I think it's I know that it's done on a shoestring, and I know that Bianca and Yves are over their head with tasks, and have done whoever's doing the admin, I think Tom also, have been doing really exemplary work. I think what is very important is that the connections that are made with different militants in different areas are, we find ways to develop them, and perhaps to participate, perhaps people from St. Catharines coming to Hamilton or whatever is feasible, to build something that's a movement more than an email list or a bunch of Facebook connections or whatever. I think we've got that possibility in this campaign, and we've started really from not very much, and gotten a fair ways already. But that is what I would like to see come out of this: some sort of more lasting set of connections from which new things can develop in the event that Yves doesn't win the NDP leadership.
Thank you, Tom. Final thoughts from you, Jasmine?
Yeah, I think one thing that has been making me really hopeful is seeing students on campus just being so brave with the Palestine protests. I spoke about this earlier, a different call, but students at Concordia and in Montreal, actually all over, I saw it on Vancouver Island as well, are facing suspensions and tribunals and even getting expelled for protesting. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous. On my campus this year, there's more surveillance cameras everywhere. The security team that they brought in is from an ex-IDF soldier, Perceptage, that they bring on to police the students. And in front of, like, despite all of that, they just say, okay, well, cover your faces, guys, because, like, we have to fight. So that's just, like, we're adapting, and we're still going forward, especially, like, the undergraduate students. It's just been incredible to see their bravery. And I also think, to go with Kshama's point, like, about Mamdani, It's been really inspiring. I think like before I started this campaign, I followed Yves' work, but like I didn't know him personally. And I felt that he was quite brave and courageous. But then in the face of all of this vetting and so much of the campaign work that's going on, he's still like fully embracing everything that's coming his way, showing that he's been incorruptible like throughout this entire protest. And I see him on the streets in Montreal at the pro-Palestine protest, and despite so much going on in his life. So I mean, that definitely is just very inspiring.
Well, thank you, Jasmine. Yves.
Well, I agree with Jasmine. I mean, the student strike that just took place last couple days in Montreal. I mean, there was I think 80,000 plus students on strike to mark 2 years of Canadian-backed Holocaust in Gaza. And the weekend on the big demo on the weekend, there was 20,000 people demonstrating. 2 years have been every single weekend. Then there was a car rally the next day. Every single weekend. On October 7th, there was 3 different demonstrations. I was able to go to 2 of them. I saw the night one. It was into the thousands of people as well. I mean, there's never been in the history of Canadian foreign policy a greater popular uprising against Canada's complicity in international crimes. So that is definitely inspiring. Concretely, with regards to this campaign, I find it remarkable. You get all this like attacks in the media last couple of days, and there's basically no one in our campaign that is, I don't know, bailing or saying, oh, they're, going along with it. The NDP blocks me from entering the convention, NDP convention on September 20th in Niagara, and I was worried, should I put this out publicly because then people are going to think, oh well, they're they're not going to allow him in the race and it's going to lose momentum and stuff like that. There's no sense of that. People understand the situation. We have this political party that is controlled by people who, one day they're working for the party, the next day they're working for Airbnb, doing a lobbyist for Airbnb. They understand the nature of the party that we're dealing with here, and they want to keep going. They want to donate. They want to push the bounds. I think people are a mix of appalled by what they've seen happen for 2 years in Gaza and are just horrified by the politicians that have enabled that. And let's be clear, the NDP's gone a lot better on that issue in recent months, but you have many examples of Jagmeet Singh smearing those protesting Canada's complicity in genocide until not very long ago. And so I'm just totally inspired by the level of support for the campaign and the resilience. The people are not just like buckling under the brass's shenanigans, not just buckling under the corporate media smears. So that's very inspiring. And we're going to keep going, and hopefully we're going to be able to make a huge dent. We've already had a big impact in terms of, again, putting challenging capitalism onto the agenda, and we're just going to keep pushing forward. And when they attack us, we use those attacks to strengthen ourselves, to build, and we've done that from the venues that were shut down a few weeks ago, and onwards.
Thank you, Yves. Kshama, any closing thoughts?
I really agree with what Yves, Jasmine, and Tom have said. It is really actually a hopeful moment, just given how much working class people have really understand about the system and how much consciousness has moved by leaps and bounds. Obviously, we have a long way to go, but we're already in such a change period. So it actually would be, in many ways, it would be fatal for us to be able to build anything in the future if we had the mistaken idea that there isn't hope. There is enormous hope. I really also agree with Jasmine that the courage of and self-sacrifice of young people is just incredible. They have taken on enormous body blows, physical and otherwise. We've seen hundreds of students in the United States who've been suspended, expelled, facing absolutely horrendous false charges, as I said, have been physically assaulted. We're seeing young people in Britain under a Labour government no less. I mean, absolutely shameful. They're being imprisoned on terrorism charges. I mean, these are incredible sacrifices that young people are making. And in this context, we should hope that there is a way forward. What gives me a sober feeling, if I might turn the question a little bit the other way, is the absence of the kind of principled and revolutionary leadership that we need on a mass scale. And that is the challenge here. We need principled and revolutionary leadership on a mass scale that is willing to build concrete struggle. And I say that specifically concrete struggle because we know a lot of Marxist organizations and leaderships who actually don't do anything. They just have theoretical discussions, but they don't believe that their role is on the arena of class struggle, and that their role is to carry out the kind of sacrifice that leaders need to carry out, defeat the gatekeepers, not make it about your own comfort, and the need to reject careerism. All of this needs to be done on a mass basis. And we are starting small in our era because revolutionary leadership, militant labor leadership has been so decimated internationally in the last 50 years. So we have a really sobering task ahead of us. And so concretely right now, I think it is crucial that especially in the United States, but everywhere, including Canada, we need to continue doubling down on building the working class anti-war movement internationally. It's really empowering to see the support that you all have had. Really appreciate all the work that you all have done, especially Jason and Bianca. I know this is from personal experience, this is hard work. You have to put your personal lives aside for the most part in order to make this happen, but there is no other way to make this happen. So it's really important that that's recognized, and I look forward to building on an ongoing basis alongside you all.
Oh, thank you, Kshama. What a beautiful discussion. Huge thanks to Kshama Sawant, Yves Engler, Jasmine Peardon, Tom Reid. Thanks to all of you for your incredible principled leadership and for your sacrifice. And thank you all, everyone at home, for watching. Please do read and share the platform, ndp2026.ca. Capitalism can't be fixed. Onward to a socialist future. Keep your courage bright. This is how we win together. Good night, everybody, and solidarity. Good night. Jason, any last words from you before we part? Organization lead.
All I'm going to say is that Kshama had mentioned internationalism being one of so crisis of leadership has come out of this discussion a lot, and us stepping up as being a new form of leadership for building among working class and the left and fighting for socialism. But internationalism, I think, is an important element. And Kshama had mentioned the idea of doing another forum together where they can really mobilize American workers. And I think if we put our heads together, we can develop a really good international forum with socialists from across the world to really highlight what we are about, because we are bottom-up politics. And internationalism for the NDP is like flying to Switzerland and staying in a posh hotel. That's what it is. But for us, it's socialists on the ground in India and Pakistan, in West Asia, across the globe, who are fighting to liberate humanity from the chains of injustice. And that is precisely how we need to be our guiding principles going forward. So I look forward to building our webinar coming soon to a link for you guys. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been a brilliant event.
Wonderful. Solidarity, everybody.